Thank you. And I want to welcome Evan Pritchard to Moccasin Tracks. Hi, Evan.
Hey, Evan.
There you are. Here we
Nice
are.
having
And
my
our
hat on.
shot up here. Welcome to the show.
Yeah,
We've introduced you a little
yeah,
bit
well,
and introduced the topic, connecting our modern lives with Algonquin culture and asking ourselves some of those tough questions, Um, and perhaps if you wanted to uh, introduce yourself a little bit or just say hello to our listeners before we start.
well, they call me Chipmunk, and Avat Bahamich in the Mik'maq language, and that was given to me by Albert Ward, who passed away, I believe, 3 years ago yesterday, and led an amazing life and healed thousands of people, and through the sweat lodges, and so he named me, and that was a really long time ago. Yugas ago, and I don't know, but it was in the 1980s, I believe. So,
Yeah.
I wrote about it, No Word for Time, and then I've written 17 books since then about like filling in some of the gaps for people about Algonquin culture, and so I founded the Center for Algonquin Culture, also in the 90s, and still going,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's a beautiful culture. That's all I can say. Beautiful people.
Yeah. I'm so inspired by this whole thought of, we live our lives in modern society, but yet we keep, an awareness to a culture that was here before us, and how do we walk in a way that brings respect to that culture that we live side by side with in our modern lives.
Side by side.
Yeah,
Right. Yes, it's not only the past, it's the present, and we hope in the future.
yeah,
And that's a very different culture, and yet it seems to coexist with whatever this is today. That's interesting, right? So it's not this or that. It's not like it was all past. It's not, all gone. It's also here. So there's always that paradox, and it's never that it's the opposite of what we're doing, but it's different. And and often there are things that are similar enough that we share, and we share with the Algonquin culture even today. Everyone does, and yet what kind of always bothered me was that nobody will acknowledge that fact. It seems to be part of this, whatever. I mean, you could call it brainwashing. I wouldn't go that far. I think just sometimes it's just kind of a habit. We're into the habit of not mentioning the presence, the historical and modern day presence of native people right here in the East, especially.
hmm
So that'd be a good topic.
yeah, yeah. I
Right.
mean, we see sometimes street signs or towns and names of places that were named in the past that we bring forward. Um, but we don't learn too much about like what was going on there, in the past. Um,
Or even that it's native. Sometimes people don't know, you know, that a word is native.
yeah,
And, like over in Maine, the Saco River, a lot of people don't know what that means, but that's the Sakokis. That's Abenaki. I mean, it's Micmac territory. And somebody asked me, I said, well, mom grew up near the Saco River with Saco Indians, but it was Micmac. And that's perfectly, normal because the Micmac, the Mi'kmaq, as we say now, are very strong in that region. But also it's a region where the Sakokis live, and the Saco River is named after them. And I believe that the two tribes had a kind of, what I'm starting to understand about Algonquin culture is that not only would a tribe have a clan system within the tribe, but there would be a sort of a crow system between them and other tribes that had their own clan systems. And I hope that someday either I or other people will research that and try to understand that better, because there was all kinds of intermarriage between Mi'kmaq and the Secokis and Abenaki.
Hmm.
You see that more and
Mm.
more, and I think that the Wappingers and the Munsee had a similar kind of, you know, intertribal clan system, so that
Hmm.
they wouldn't have the defects. You know, of course, they didn't want to have inbreeding, and that's where Daniel Ninham comes from. He said, in his own subtle way, he said, "Well, you know, my father's people are Munsee Delaware." And then he kind of went on to the next subject. Whoa, okay, what does that mean? But he was Wappingers to his mother. I think is very common. So my people, you know, didn't intermarry so much that I know with the Abenaki, but all those Mik'maq people in the area were doing that. It was very common.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, you witnessed that, Rick,
Okay.
too, and people that you know and your family and the connections that you find.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, it's it's interesting to meet people who are centered in knowing their native background, and the people who I know who are native and they don't acknowledge it at all.
Hmm.
I am constantly running into people who whisper to me. One man on the steps of the post office, uh, you know, my grandfather was Abenaki.
Yeah, yeah,
That's pretty close. That's close blood.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
right. So he's Abenaki,
um,
but not, you know, not fairly recognized here,
right.
I guess. So that's part of it too.
yeah,
You know, little manipulation there. But
yeah.
yeah, you know, you see that, you know, you see it so often here, you know, and people can also tell you terrible stories about things that happened when somebody said they were Indian, and you know, they lost their job, or you know, lost a
Hmm.
relationship, or you know, the woman wouldn't marry him because he was Indian, but then turns out she was Indian, and you know, the stories abound.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, we were also going to talk about how to keep our focus, how to keep our intentions clear when there's so many distractions that are happening today. The obvious wars and things like that, but um, also destructive behavior that individuals are practicing, and we see. Uh, how can we how can we keep our focus? How do we stay clear in a way that moves us forward, um, in also, keeping the sacredness of knowing that there is a richer culture and a richer way of being that is inclusive, that creates community and circles and um, nurturing, when sometimes it's just like really hard to do with, you know, such an impact of the wars and things going on
Right,
in your
right.
practice.
Well,
Can you
yeah,
share with us a little bit of your thoughts?
yeah. Well, you know, this is the old way of life can be found throughout the world through indigenous people and the ancient traditions. That's very nurturing and loving and inclusive and not hateful. And you know, I don't know if all the powers that be want people to know that, but it is, and it's worldwide. But especially when you have Algonquin culture, which is 10,000 or more years old, it contains and preserves that same ancient feeling of um, what they call fellow feeling in England, but the idea of feeling that relatedness to other people and caring, and also connection to what some call the natural world, which is really uh, interdependent with us and should be. We didn't put barriers between ourselves and nature, but let's say for now there's a connection, feeling and nurturing that connection with animals, plants, and birds who are the species. So the thing is that this question of focus, it's not that we should have a narrow focus, but that we should have the freedom of focus, the right, the inherent right to our very consciousness and our identity as aware beings. And what's happening recently, and I think it's pretty clear. I asked people if they notice a change, and most people say, yeah, they notice a change. Is that, we've always had this, take it for granted that we can focus on what we want to. We can have our consciousness about issues we want to have, want to be aware of. But now there's this new element in that there's so much chaos and so much interference on a basic, information level that it's changed the game, so to speak. So now we have to be more dedicated to return to our focus, what we want to focus on. It doesn't have to be narrow, but it's ours. And there's a possibility with all this interference of putting our awareness on self-destructive behaviors, which would further destroy that clear focus. So we talk about in terms of Neolin in Algonquin, that's enlightenment. And that's the ability to think larger thoughts, big thoughts, inclusive, like feeling and seeing the connections, and not only thinking that there are connections, but actually seeing the connection between ourselves and other people, and ourselves and animals and birds, the four-leggeds and the two-leggeds and the snake, and act on that. And so what happens is that this interference is constantly, it's the phone, it's the computer, it's the news, there's disruptions everywhere that we react to. And that's a natural thing, but there's too much. And so we have to have techniques to come back to the focus we want. And I use the flute with people, and I play the flute, and I say, listen just to the sound of the flute and nothing else. And that retrains the mind to focus on something that's easy to focus on. So one of the things that I find is, there's, when we get into being scattered, then we can also be distracted by fear. And fear is not a bad thing. Fear is a response of self-preservation. But if we panic, then our brain shuts down. And this is well known. But there's like 5 different compartments in the brain. The names, the hippocampus and frontal cortex and neocortex and so forth and so on. And they all, the limbic brain, the animal brain, as they call it, a lizard brain, is actually the one where our shamanic power comes in. We need to connect all of them. And when you panic, you lose that. They just shut down. They don't work together anymore. And then you're likely to make a mistake. And you won't be able to remember things, and you won't remember what you were about to do, and you don't remember your higher principles of nonviolence. And so you become unmindful. So first of all is to value serenity, because that is an Algonquin virtue. You always hear about it, but it's very obvious that all of our spiritual goals are very difficult unless you have some serenity. And this, for us, for elders, they say, oh, well, I smoke the pipe and that brings me peace, and not just a quote unquote peace pipe. So that's the doorway into these teachings, is that serenity. But if somebody's, there's all these fears that are being brought up every minute, not just by news of wars far away, but by all the rules and regulations that are, where we have to jump through all these hoops, creates anxiety. And at some point you might have that one thing that trips you up and makes you panic. Once you panic, better stop, better start over. And that's why meditation now more with people because it's become needed. But that's just one thing. But also there's and then courage is something, we talk about the brave and that's overdone, but it really is our people value bravery and value courage, and that's something that it's a muscle that we need to exercise, right? When you want to be afraid, maybe there's a good reason, but exercise that courage muscle. And that may be painful because it's a muscle you haven't used, but separate the pain of the outer influence, from the pain of working that muscle. It's a great muscle, the courage muscle. We need it more and more. And so there's other things we can look, for example, in terms of the self-destructive thoughts of depression. It's like the mind is this game field now. It's like a football field, and there's all these other players in your mind trying to defeat you. And in fact, also there's this pit of quicksand in the middle of the field. Well, how did that get there? I don't know, but you got to watch out. And that's that chronic depression thing that can get started, and that can do you in. That's self-destructive, and addictions are self-destructive. So those are just two things, but there's more. But those are some of the main ways that people can get sidetracked. It's like consciousness is not necessarily, I mean, it's a European word, but it's valued by Native people. They know that. We all know that consciousness is you. That's part of who you are. And if somebody can undermine your consciousness, they got you. They won. And so I think people have often worried about, well, these Native Americans, they have this whole different way of looking at life and works for them. Do we really want them around? I think it's not always about land. People always assume that whatever I'm fighting for, it must be about land. That's not really true. We're tied up with our real life needs, and that has to do with land and living off land. But I think before that, it has to do with awareness, with consciousness, with this kneel and enlightenment, and being able to know the old ways, to see them, and that's what I was taught too. It's like, it's not so much about what tribe you're labeling yourself as that moment, but it has to do with what you know and what you have preserved of your ancestors' knowledge about reality. So yeah, it's a different reality, and it's right here, right around us, everywhere.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It.
You mentioned that media sometimes is a distraction, the phone and these other things that we use every day, distracting us. Do you think that they're distracting us from knowing our true consciousness, or our true path that we may or may not be aware of? We all have gifts to share with each other. What comes first? Getting along with our family, getting along with our community, and then recognizing what we have to share in that community, and building on that. But all the time being aware of like what it's like today in this modern world with all these distractions happening. We make a choice, I think. And I,
Hmm.
I'm wondering what uh, is that part of developing our consciousness, or being aware of what our path really is.
Well, it has to do with freedom, and that's something that I know Algonquin people value, and the Mi'kmaq people too. I was told when I really started putting my feet on that path, in terms of the whole community, they talk about, we're freedom people. We believe in freedom, first of all. And that may be more important than money in terms of this battle for consciousness. I think it has to do with freedom. That maybe insecurity of leaders, wanting to control eliminate the worst case scenarios before they happen. And of course, on an individual level, that makes sense. But in terms of governing a planet, which is kind of where we're headed, to eliminate the possibility of anybody doing anything they don't like, of course, then the brainwash 9 billion people. And I'm not for that. For freedom, and ethical behavior, but you can't necessarily control everyone's behavior across the planet. And that's why fear helps control people that you can't get at, but I choose freedom, you know, and and then we have to be ethical, and the freedom will be taken away. We all see that every day. So ethics has to do with, even with our native people, and the same around the world. There's a certain strong current of understanding that has to do with honoring free will. And I'm seeing lately a strange movement, not that anyone's leading it, but kind of a erosion of respect for each other. And that bothers me. People not respecting others' free will without even maybe realizing that they are, just like taking somebody else's life in their own hands and saying, well, I need somebody to do this, so you're going to do it for me. I'm seeing that. I never saw that before. So, what I can say is, being on your show is that that's something that your listeners, maybe they're just looking at themselves. I'm not going to lecture, but look and see if other people around them are just being free with their free will, right? Instead of their own, or maybe they've done it to somebody without realizing it. They've just like usurped their individual choice and saying, well, you need to do this for me. And you need to do it now. Well, that's not free will. That's not really ethical. So ethics still stands.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we might call it something else in the native world, right?
Yeah. What do you think, Rick?
Well, beyond the native community, and I'm not being negative, but it seems to be a reality that you look around and you see a lot of people holding on to negative energy and using that to symbolically whip other people with it. There's a lot of people that I meet that they can't smile, they can't laugh. They're walking around with scowls on their faces and really angry energy. And even, I consider myself a very positive person. And I greet people and I smile and I ask them how they're doing. And there are people that just glare and they grunt. And actually, recently, a man had his arms bulked out to his sides, and he walked right towards me. And there was other places where he could have walked around, and he chose to walk right towards me with this ugly face. And it enraged me, actually. It was one of those moments where, like, who the hell do you think you are? And I see that being symbolically done in the Native community as well. And that's, I feel, something that people have to get away from and start acknowledging that they're not king of the dawn land or whatever.
I heard an expression, you're taking up a lot of space, dude.
Yep.
Taking up a lot of space, right?
Yep.
So that works, right? Hey, you're taking up a lot of space.
Yeah.
It's gentle,
Yeah, I see the space around me, like two or 3 feet around me is a liberated space.
Right. Right.
Uh,
The DMC. Yeah,
Yeah.
I buy that.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we were talking about going back to the other topic, which is fun, about there's so many. I mean, Algonquin culture is so vast and everywhere. Some going back thousands of years, and it's still present. And I ask people to say any person, place, or thing in North America or South, but North America, and to see if I can relate it to Algonquin culture. And so I mean, it's fun. I may not always be able to do that, but the traces are still there, and whether you consider them now to be corrupted or not, that's not my fault. They're corrupted, but historically, it's involved. It's in the mesh and the woof. What is the woof and weave and whatever of our society? For example, I asked somebody to name a person, place, doing North America. They said, "Well, there's the Vince Lombardi Trophy for winning the Super Bowl." I said, "Okay, Vince Lombardi, born in Brooklyn, which is the land of the Canarsie. He died in Washington on the banks of the Potomac, which is an Algonquin word. Canarsie or Algonquin, Potomac.
Oh, okay.
At George Washington University's hospital there. It's on the Potomac, place where tribute is brought. And then he he was a coach for the Giants, which was more or less founded by Jim Thorpe, who was a Sac and Fox Indian who played for the Giants in 19. He played in the World Series for the baseball Giants and for the football Giants in the same year. And he got into some trouble with that. But then he became NFL head of the founder of the NFL was Jim Thorpe, who really helped develop football as we know it. Out of lacrosse, which is Begetaway, which is a word told an Algonquin game, the little brother of war and the substitute for war, so on, which is nonviolent. So then he got involved with the Green Bay Packers. Now they play at Lambeau Field. If you know football, everybody knows Lambeau Field, and it's a unique history because there was Mr. Lambeau was played he was a halfback for Notre Dame. You've heard the Hunchback of Notre Dame. He was the fullback of Notre Dame, and then he was injured, and he worked for a packing company called the Indian Packing Company of Green Bay, Wisconsin, which was founded by Native Americans in a cooperative way, not a capitalist way. And he became very big in that company. And that company founded a football team, their own football team, because why the hell not, right? Let's build a football team. And they formed the Green Bay Packers, okay, from these collectively, cooperatively
Are we
gathered
connected
profits.
yet? Yeah.
Are we connected yet? And then, so he became a player coach of this new team first, right away, because he was like the star employee. And of course in Green Bay you have basically very many different Algonquin groups living there. But Green Bay has been early Algonquin from 4,000 to 5,000 years. That was one of the areas where the old copper culture flourished. And I mean, that's our high, Egyptians are great and they can look back at the time of the pyramids. Hey, look, we built these pyramids. But Algonquins can point to Green Bay and say, look, we did stuff with copper before anyone else, before the Egyptians.
Mm.
And we had a great civilization in Green Bay going way back, we built mounds and stuff. And that was, the Green Bay Packers. And so Vince Lombardi became a coach for them, offensive coach for the Giants, but then he went over and became the coach for the Green Bay Packers, right? And that made his name with all this very warrior-like behavior, which was channeled into something positive. And then he went back to Washington, which is, where he ended up living and dying for what was called the Redskins. And I know that's racist and all, but that goes back, to the whole, the way it's Dallas Lone Star, what's his name? The founder of the team. But yeah, that had native roots too, and debatable native roots. but now it's like the commander. Anyway, so that's just one thing, that one trophy that people are flinging around in the last few days because of the Kansas City Chiefs, whose stadium, Arrowhead Stadium, is on top of a Kickapoo village site with a Kickapoo burial site, and Mahomes, their quarterback, donates $1 million every year to the Kickapoo because he feels like a lot of injustice he can't change.
Wow.
So gives them $1 million every year, win or
Know.
lose.
Yeah.
You know? And so that's just part of it. So the Kansas City Chiefs, actually, if anybody wants to look it up, the original Kansas City Chiefs were a bunch of Shawnee chiefs who a missionary named McCoy, Reverend McCoy, brought them to Kansas City, Missouri, which is that's a Sioux name, Missouri, but we're friends. So he brought them up so they'd be safe from racists and dangerous, yahoos who would try to hurt them, because he wanted them to be able to have their consciousness and live their spiritual lives without interference. They brought them to Kansas City, the Shawnee Mission. And guess what happened? Always this interference, right? So this fellow named Andrew Jackson, who's on your 20, became president, and he had the Indian Removal Act, and he abolished that mission, and they moved west into Kansas City, Missouri, Kansas City, Kansas, and Kansas was another tribe, of course, but pushed them there, but they had no structure and no support there. And they ended up, all these Shawnee, Kansas City Chiefs were just pushed across the prairies, and many of them died because they had, even an Indian can't just live off of nothing, And some of them ended up in Oklahoma, where there is a Shawnee nation today. The Shawnees are terrific people. They're very resilient, but some of them didn't make it to Oklahoma there. So when you see the Kansas City Chiefs, gosh, think about the original Kansas City Chiefs, who were like just really screwed, and who were beautiful people. But also on the other side of the Super Bowl, you have the 49ers, named after those gold rush people. But next to them, the Oakland Raiders, the very next team a few miles away, were named after a Native American game called Raiders, which was played just north of Oakland before contact. And this game is the closest game you can find in the world to football. It's almost the same. Raiders. You can look it up in these big compiled studies on Native American games. There's a couple of famous books. So you'll find Raiders as a game played north of Oakland, and it's really the same thing. So that's just one word. That's one thing. That's that trophy. And I'm just like showing you how it's all tied in with this huge network of Native American history, giving it all, whether willingly or not, we don't know. I think it's probably not always willing, but they're just, people say, oh, these pioneers, they came out and they took everything. Well, yeah, they took football, they took Green Bay and all that. But we can't change that. But we can honor, it's a kind of a land acknowledgement of the mind. Acknowledge what things you like in your life, whatever it is. Maybe you like baseball, it's a whole other thing. Chief Bender, one of the great pitchers, he was a Ojibwe. Whatever you like, look it up and find out. Maybe there's a native history there way back, and then can further honor our native heritage. So that's one thing I wanted to mention today.
Oh, yeah.
Because I call that, I do a little game with that. I ask people to stump the chipmunk. Right. So maybe I'll ask Rick. Rick, can you name any person, place, or thing, any noun in North America that you maybe don't think is related to Algonquin?
The Taylor Swift River.
Is there a Taylor Swift River? Well,
no, I'm
pulling
your leg.
Okay, but she comes up. No, but she comes up. So I looked at it. She was born in Reading, Pennsylvania. And if you know Eastern Lenape, that is the Mecca. That's ground zero for Eastern Lenape people. During the French and Indian War, there was a fort built there just to kind of keep track of those Lenapes there. And they were coming in from, here and there. So So Reading, Pennsylvania is on. I'm glad I looked this up. It's funny you asked. The Schuylkill River goes through Philadelphia, which is the headquarters of the UNAMI, and it goes swiftly up there, crosses 202, which was a great Native American trail, only 2 hours from Philly, and then by boat. And then you go further, you get to Reading, and that's the place of the Reading Eagle newspaper, which has been pro-Native, as far as I know, for decades, 100 years. And then you go on, and there's all this rich Lenape history in Reading. And then she moved to Nashville, which is the Natchez Trace goes through there. That's not Algonquin, but pretty close. And then, on and on. So I don't endorse, I don't know what her all thing is about. There's ups and downs and whatnot. Sings well. I say she sings well. But, whether she has the Native ancestry herself, she may have, because Reading, Pennsylvania, that's like the big center of culture, even now for Eastern Lenape. And I think, there's a big, by the way, Rick, I'll tell you, there's a big Algonquin Cultural Center in Reading, and the name is so authentic, I can't even pronounce it.
Wow.
Wow. Yeah, Evan, we just have a couple minutes left. So if there was anything special in closing you wanted our listeners to take away today.
Yeah, we always honor the passing of our elders, whatever form they take. And again, 3 years ago, grandfather Turtle passed away. The one I wrote about in No Word for Time, which is a book that you can get, through any store. But also a few days ago, Reger passed away, and he was not Native, but he was this cab driver from Brooklyn that rose to fame and fortune and was like a brother to me. And he was there at the first sweat lodge we did in the United States with grandfather Turtle back in the 1980s, and he stuck with us. And he's written a lot of very interesting books. He was very into non-dualistic East Indian philosophy and spoke Sanskrit and read Sanskrit fluently. And so I've been reading his books, and we're going to do a little thing later today. And so he always was very, how you say, people would come to him, lots of people would come to him for all this teaching. And sometimes you say, talk to Evan about that, So I was happy to freely share wisdom with his people. So he passed away on the 6th of February, and I'm actually still in mourning for that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Evan, for joining us today. It's always an honor to see you and hear your words, and thank you for gifting us with your words today, Rick.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, Evan, for being on the show today. I'm so amazed what a fount of knowledge you are. Really, I mean, it's fascinating, and you shared some really great things today that I wasn't aware of, and I'm sure you shared it with our listeners too, who may be thinking about things a little differently also. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Rick. That's kind of what I wanted to put across today, was that the interconnections of Algonquin culture are so vast and random. You could name anything and it's related, but think about the listener, think about something you like, something that brings you joy and happiness. And then look and find it somehow influenced by Algonquin history. I bet you it is.
If it wasn't given from the vision, you're missing my lyricism. Listen, I'm hitting and splitting the politicking on the RZ decisions of living in poverty. You're hard to see my sovereignty. It causing me to follow GOD philosophy. Constantly gossiping, no equality or harmony. Can I get a job? No, you can't. You're not related, man. I hate to see it when I'm animated. Get faded, a native awaited to say it. So debated or play it. Everything in life has a price, and the spiritual you'll pay it. Lay it down and spray the clouds with lyrical spiritual flow. Just to let you know it's all my chest, but you don't hear it. No, we keep on rocking and shocking, cause the time is ticking, talking, and we locking it down. Till you open, we keep knocking. Whoa.